What app can I book a London taxi on? To be honest, I don't actually know the answer. And you might be wondering, Tom, you're a London taxi driver. Surely if anyone's going to know, it's you. The answer is not that simple. We've had lots and lots of apps, and there's a lot of scarring deep down in the London taxi trade.
Took the corporate shilling.
The demise of the trade.
I just think it makes a mockery of the knowledge.
And whilst I can't suggest one particular app, I will explore the reasons as to why you might want to pick one over the other, so you can try and navigate this difficult landscape. Let's get started. To understand how apps came into the taxi market, we've got to go back into the past a little bit and establish what was there before. Radio circuits. Radio circuits have kind of always existed within the taxi trade, and even private hire as well, whereby there would be a booking office who would manage a booking. Now, radio circuits specifically for taxi drivers was a really lucrative way of working, because more often than not, these circuits had access to good clients, big jobs. So it'd be a premium to join a radio circuit, in some cases up to about £150 a month. But for many drivers, it was the opportunity to get real long jobs out of town. It really was a way of just matching up the average cab driver with corporate clients.
We're always taking all these big bankers around with us, you know, we'd be on the same level pegging as them now, wouldn't we?
And then you had companies like Comcab, Dial-A-Cab. Comcab, obviously they had the whole computer system within the taxi as well. And many of my older colleagues speak very fondly and highly of these old radio circuits. Not every driver went on them, but the ones that did saw it as an important tool in their arsenal of being a cab driver. And for the longest time, it was the only way that taxi drivers could, in theory, see around corners until in 2011, when a company called Hailo stepped on the scene. Now, to give you a landscape of the time, this was before Uber had launched in London, and Hailo removed some of the friction that was present within the radio circuits.
The taxis are all dispatched by GPS. There's no hidden charges. You just pay the meter fare.
Here we go. There was no commitment or upfront cost required by the driver. They didn't have to have anything fitted to their taxi. It was just mobile phone, and they took a 10% commission on every job done.
You can use your app to get a London taxi to your door in just 2 taps of your smartphone.
No longer did passengers have to wait in the rain or go to the end of their cul-de-sac for a driver to come past and hope there'd be a taxi there. They could press it, request it, and know that a taxi driver would turn up. Taxi drivers of the time absolutely loved this app.
You don't need a card machine, it's so simple.
Really quick, really easy system, passengers love it.
Its strongest point, they had 15,000 London black cab drivers on there, which if we look at current numbers in London is about the number of taxi drivers in London. So they had a big chunk of the market working on that app. Now, launching in 2011, and depending on who you ask on the origin story, it was either several cab drivers that got together, made this app, and then promoted it to the wider taxi trade, or, and more than likely, was that it was a much bigger company that then selected a few cab drivers to be the face of it. But whatever the origin story, it's crucial to remember that because it's important to what comes later on in the story. We even managed to dig up this old web article from 2012. And if you look in the footer of this article is a really key point. Hailo is for black cabs only and is TfL approved. We'll park that for now. But then, 29th of June, 2012, history was made.
Why are you so upset about Uber?
I just think it makes a mockery of the knowledge. Oh yeah, there's a line, go and do it.
We basically, just a few days ago, soft launched Uber London. At a push of a button, you're gonna have a car pick you up and take you around town.
This would change the landscape of apps, taxis, and private hire forever. The app gradually got into more and more people's hands. Work gradually dried up for cabbies and was a real difficult time following the adoption of Uber in London.
And all they want to do is they've took the corporate shilling, basically.
Cabbies had been competing with private hire drivers for years. Why was this so much more revolutionary and different? Well, it was in the app itself. So no longer was there this painful delay of having to wait for a car to arrive. You seemingly pressed the button and instantly got connected to a driver. It pretty much was the same as a street hail. And over subsequent years, taxi drivers and taxi unions would take Uber and other ride-hailing apps like this to core, it's only taxi drivers that you can hail directly and work with that driver one-on-one. Private hire, ride-hailing apps, in theory, it has to go through an operator. Uber, all these apps would always argue that it does go through an operator, just exceedingly quickly. Also added into the fact that when Uber started, it was a tech startup. Lots of people, investors, plowed a lot of money into the development of this app, knowing that it would one day be quite dominant and that they could get a large profit from it. A lot of that money that was invested went heavily into subsidizing the rides for people using the app, meaning their prices were artificially low. So perfect force of a super smooth, non-clunky app where a car would arrive in minutes and seemingly take you anywhere in the capital for just about no money whatsoever. Hailo was operating worldwide and they were trying to crack the America market.
2 taps of a finger is all it takes to hail a taxi virtually.
The other taxi app, Gett, had managed to crack New York, and I'll get onto Gett as a taxi app a bit later on. This expansion for Hailo was pretty costly, and I can only imagine the pressure of Uber coming to town seriously affected their business model. Because of obviously London is very unique with the knowledge, they couldn't just increase the number of taxi drivers on their platform to try and cover the costs that they were losing desperately over in the States. I'd also imagine that many Hailo customers that were using taxis might have jumped over to Uber in that process, further hurting their bottom line. So in 2014, with a huge influx of private hire drivers working for the other mob, Hailo did the unthinkable. They allowed private hire to work on the Hailo taxi app platform. London taxi drivers were furious. Many of them who'd proudly put liveries on their taxis, displaying the Hailo advertising or stickers in their windows, or converted passengers to download this holy grail of a taxi app, were outraged.
This is the demise of the trade. If they don't stop it now.
They were allowing the same cars onto their platform that were part of Uber, the app that was seeking to destroy taxi business models worldwide. Now, whilst Hailo made a huge blunder to the number of drivers on their app, there's a number that you need to know and a blunder for you to avoid. Now, I want you to stop right now and see if any of the following apply to you. Low mood, low libido, fatigue, excess body fat. Well, it could be that you have low testosterone, and that's where the partner of today's video comes in, Manual, men's healthcare made easy. 1 in 4 men suffers from low testosterone, and you will get not only those symptoms, but a whole host of other ones like poor quality sleep, low focus. It's generally not good. With 90% of men being undiagnosed for their exact testosterone levels, what are you waiting for? They send you a finger prick test, you just do it at home at your own convenience, send it back in a prepaid envelope, and you get the results back within days. Fingers crossed your results come back within the normal ranges, but if not, Manual are there to guide you through the next part of your journey and bring your testosterone back to normal levels. And the best part is, Manual are giving you guys 45% off your first at-home TRT service check. You just use my code, which is TomH45, or the link in the description down below. And fingers crossed, you only need to do that once to see where your levels sit. I know my levels. Do you know yours? But only 1 year later, after Hailo decided they were going to be black cab and private hire, they U-turned their decision and said that they were once again black cab exclusive in October of 2015. The CEO of Hailo realised that their USP to begin with was access to this dynamic fleet. You know, they couldn't be corrupted by Uber. Black cabs didn't want to go over to Uber. So this was a really quite strong position that they had just black cabs. Once they accepted private hire onto their platform, well, they didn't really have much of anything. Black cabs didn't want to work for it because private hire were there, and private hire didn't want to work for them because there was Uber. So this is what the CEO said. From a pragmatic perspective, it's the right call to make. It allows us to really stand for something, he said. Now we've got a very clear position in the market, whereas before we were neither one nor t'other. Is he a Northerner? I don't know. Basically, in short, we can't compete with Uber. London cabbies, please, will you come back to Hailo? And even though this was quite a difficult and dark time for the London cab trade in 2015 because of how well Uber had proliferated the capital, they still didn't want to jump back to Hailo. I imagine some drivers might have done, but they weren't as loyal to this app. They saw through the original rhetoric that it was a cab trade focused app and that it was just a corporate entity. And sadly, it was an awful scenario for those several individuals who were behind the launch of Hailo. Whether they directly made the app or whether they were just the front men, they were vilified within the cab trade because of this. I can't give exact numbers as to how many drivers went back to Hailo or what happened to them as a company after this point, but we do know in 2016 it was absorbed into the My Taxi group, a German company which was the largest ride-hailing app specifically for taxis in the world. I remember being on My Taxi when I first got my badge, and it was sort of advertised as like the taxi only app, but of course many drivers had obviously long given up with Hailo and that, whereas I didn't quite know the full backstory at that time. In 2019 they then later rebranded themselves to FreeNOW, which is what it currently operates as, and in 2020 history once again repeated itself because they allowed private hire onto the apps. Many cab drivers rightly told other cab drivers, told you so, and we learn another lesson that you can never trust these big corporate entities. I guess once a cheater, always a cheater. If I die, you probably know where I've disappeared to. Someone at one of these companies has probably taken me out.
I will find you.
But what about Gett? Now, Gett was a taxi-specific ride-hailing app. They were founded in 2010 in Tel Aviv, Israel, before being a bit more calibrated with their reach and how they would get across the world. So they moved into London in 2011, moving into Russia and some of America as well. They managed to get a very good foothold within the New York market. A key note of interest was that in 2016, Volkswagen Auto Group invested $300 million into Gett, the company. It comes as no surprise that in 2017, Gett offered Porsches to their platform. You, as a London Gett user, could go through the options and go, oh, black cab, oh no, Porsche, I can ride in a Porsche today. Fixed fare of £20, they had an exclusive fleet of Porsche cars, effectively private hire. So this was Gett, the taxi-only app, now allowing private hire onto their platform. End of the day, if you've got to meet corporate targets to appease your investors, then you're going to do whatever you can to raise the bottom line. And there's even word that behind the scenes, they offer out Uber X cars to some of their corporate clients. It's an option just for the corporate side of Gett. So I wouldn't be able to see that as a normal, I guess, civvy version of the app. Of course, as many cabbies rightly predicted, in 2019, Gett formed a partnership with Lyft. Obviously, you know Lyft is a big ride-hailing app within the States, and in 2020, they partnered with Ola. Gett, the taxi app, obviously has a bit of a conflict of interest here. Now, when Gett originally launched in London to compete with Uber, they actually ended up subsidising metered rides. So it'd still be in a taxi, but the customer would get a cheaper ride than the meter. And a lot of cab drivers weren't happy with this because, of course, it devalued our meter. We had customers just getting in taxis because it was, quote, cheap, rather than understanding the true value of the service, which is the meter and the taxi itself. Now, I've blitzed across the history of Gett, but a few cabbies in 2012 actually had the foresight to see that Gett more than likely wasn't in the black cab's best interest. So they went about developing their own app. A cooperative group founded Taxi App. This was going to be an app by taxi drivers for taxi drivers, adhering to the values and the conventions of the trade, working with the meter, not against the meter. Even going as far as not putting butler buttons or concierge bells within hotels that had established taxi ranks outside. They really went above and beyond to understand what did the taxi trade want from an app. Taxi App was built with a subscription model in mind, £20 a month or 67p a day, but even that was quite difficult to get out of some cab drivers.
I ain't got that sort of money. I'm not paying 13 quid. No.
The unique thing about Taxi App was that from thereabouts its inception, it was always profitable because it knew what its income was going to be on a month-to-month basis. They could appropriately do marketing app development and so forth. And the best thing of all was that the driver got the exact metered earnings, the passenger in the back paid exactly what it said on the meter. Even from the get-go, Transport for London loved the model. When the cabbies consulted on how Taxi App would operate and it would be a subscription model, they pretty much said, yep, we approve, go away, get it done. And it was quite successful. Obviously, it doesn't have the big marketing reach of, say, My Taxi or Gett had because of the lack of corporate interests. You knew what you was getting with it. And the incentive for the driver was that there was zero commission. Whether you done one job in the month or 100 jobs, your monthly payment to Taxi App would only be £20. Sounds like the greatest idea ever. Until Taxi App sold out.
Not another one?
Money talks, and I'm sure everyone has a price. I don't know the exact ins and outs of what happened here, but obviously it went from a cooperative model, subscription-based, to a commission model that had investors attached to it. And I imagine it's what happens when you get people outside of the taxi trade into a small venture like this. People just want growth at all costs. It's like, well, we're making this app, why can't we make this as big as Gett or FreeNOW? They couldn't see the idea of just making an app for a small, almost seemingly altruistic venture, when really it was built with the cab driver in mind. And with any of these kind of ventures, once an external investor comes in, it becomes about money and profit first rather than customer first. How can that investor get their money back out rather than focus on the specific needs of the customer? And now if you look at the Taxi App website, it says it's 0% commission. If I'm downloading an app, apps cost money, and using the app, apps need support if there's customer issues, so that's money as well. How could it be taking 0% commission and not have a subscription fee? There's no longer a subscription fee associated with Taxi App. And there are investors on board. So how are they going to return a profit? Someone's got to be paying somewhere. So I can't honestly tell you how that app works. And sadly, it's another scar to blemish the London taxi trade. And this best kind of represents where I think a lot of the problems sit with taxi apps. There's a Venn diagram of crossover here. You have the kind of cooperative, thinking about the long-term issues and values of the taxi trade over here, and then you have the corporate commercial side over here. But the Venn diagram can't ever really intersect, because if it does, those values of being a reliable taxi service, the USPs of a taxi, being linked to the meter, fair and honest pricing, don't really sit well with the commercial side of things. So I've pretty much told you the demise of some of the key apps within the taxi trade. What can you do as a customer? What apps and options are available to you if you want a taxi in London? Now, sadly, it is from the examples I provided you as to why there is such long-lasting scars within the taxi trade and why it's really difficult to get a solid amount of cab drivers behind pretty much any effort within the cab trade, not just taxi apps. There's always worry or some sort of fear of an underlying political or corporate agenda that might take away the work or that might impose some kind of threat to cab drivers. But I don't want to leave you in the dark here. I want to show you what the current state of play is, what my opinion is on these apps, and you can make an appropriate decision next time you're in London and you can't hail a cab off the street. And over the years that I've been active on YouTube, and I'm kind of become a little bit of a bastion or representative of the cab trade, I've been approached by just about every one of these app companies, either to feature as a brand ambassador or give them some kind of PR. And even though there's some financial incentives there, I've turned them down each time. I've maybe had a bit of a conversation, understood what they're about, but it's never felt quite right to me. I've spoken with other cabbies on this issue before. You know, I've been approached by this company, do you reckon it's good if I do some sort of promotion or PR with them? And they come back to it and say, well, look, people listen to you, Tom, because you're kind of this overall voice of reason within the cab trade. And even for, like, you know, normal passengers, I don't want to say this is the best app and then 2 years down the line it then accepts private hire drivers onto the platform, it gets bought out by Uber, any one of those things that could logically happen. So I'm not aligned to any one of these apps. I've used them in various scenarios over the years, but I'm going to give you as much information so you can best inform yourself. Firstly, the behemoths, FreeNOW and Gett. Both of these are still operating, and for the driver there is a commission of 18% and 20%, i.e. whatever amount you get charged, the driver has to cough up 18-20%, or they don't actually see the full fare, they just get paid after that commission has been taken. Now, I'm not here to look at other cab drivers and say, oh, they shouldn't use FreeNOW, they shouldn't use Gett, because at the end of the day, we've all done the knowledge so we can all work for ourselves and work in our own way, and maybe not get caught up in the whole politics of it all. If that's how they want to earn a pound note, great. But maybe if you are a cabbie, if you are a knowledge student, or even just a user of cabs, hopefully you can heed my warning on some of these and what my personal stance is on this. Now, the primary reason why I use FreeNOW or Gett would be to get me in or out of town. Because once I'm in town, I really don't understand the reasoning and the rationale as to why someone in Covent Garden or the West End would use an app to hail a taxi. There's an abundance of taxis generally in town. You might maybe struggle around the 10:30 West End burst when everyone's getting a cab to the stations, but all other times, street hail is king. And me as a driver, I always prioritise that. But the exception is when I'm going home, because TfL literature and rules are that I cannot turn down a job if it's under 12 miles or less than 1 hour in length. But I can turn down app work, so that's where it's quite useful for me. What I will say for passengers and drivers as well is the premiums. Both Gett and FreeNOW have their own form of surge charging. It used to be called a technology charge, but basically in busier times they whack, say, £12 on top. So let's use Gett as an example. Really, really busy in town, everyone wants a cab, I get an app notification saying there's a job here plus £12 on top. Seems nice, right? Let's imagine it's a £20 job plus £12 takes us up to £32. Now they take 20% commission anyway, so about £6.50-ish, £6.40 of that is going straight to commission. So it's no longer a £12 bonus, and once you factor in the commission, you're only earning like an extra £5-6 on top. So is it really worth that? But customer gets charged an extra £12. The whole USP of a London taxi is that it's the same vehicle, same standardised knowledge, same price, same publicly hireable and accessible vehicle to everyone. These apps are making you kind of bid for taxis. They're artificially driving up the price of a taxi. It means that you're going to get drivers in the city that will actively turn off their light and drive past obliging customers who have willingly stood out in the rain with the hope of trying to find a black cab just to go and find the person that bidded the highest. And even more insidious is that once that customer downloads that app and they know they can get a taxi in that way, they are then an app customer. And if it's in the case of FreeNOW, they will get marketing offers and half-price rides in, say, a private hire vehicle, because the app wants to retain that customer. Now, you could apply that same analogy to me getting my going home job, right? I am effectively turning down street work to get home, but I need to go home at some point. Maybe if someone can make an app that specifically focuses on that and it doesn't have any hidden agendas or fixed fees and stuff like that added to it, I'd be all over that. So Gett and FreeNOW, largely the same. Big companies, lots of employees, lots of marketing budget and drive. They need a good turnover of drivers and rides. Don't even like the term rides, it sounds like a white knuckle roller coaster or something. It's all about corporate greed mainly. Let's look at some of the smaller apps. So I mentioned Taxi app. When I was on it before, when it was a subscription model, I was quite short-sighted in my mindset. I'd only just got out in the taxi. It seemed like a lot of hassle to always have the app open, and there didn't seem to be that much work coming through. It was always snapped up. Long-term mindset should have been, look, let's just support this, let this grow. You know, you're investing in the future of the cab trade. So Taxi app is still about 0% commission. I'm not using it, and I don't really hear too much on that. There was another one called Taxi Now, another initiative started by cabbies. They had, I think on starting, about 2.5% commission or 5% commission. Instantly, even though I'm kind of not one for the commission model, I can't really get behind. Doesn't really fill me with confidence in terms of paying an app developer, paying someone who's going to work within support, paying for a marketing drive. An interesting one that's come up now, and I don't know a lot about this, but it seems very promising, is one called Unify, made by a cab driver, and he hasn't got sort of any commercial interest, but Unify works because in the TfL literature, if you book a taxi driver via telephone or an app, the driver can add £2 to the meter within the extras. Now you can't do that on FreeNOW or Gett because technically in their terms they've already taken that £2 for themselves. But with Unify it's different. Unify connects you with a customer, they get in your cab, you put an extra £2 on the meter, customer pays it, the driver then effectively donates that £2 to Unify. The user of the taxi only gets charged an extra £2, which is just an app fee, I guess. That's more than reasonable. And they get charged the metered amount. The taxi driver earns the metered amount. All seems happy days. So I'll leave that down below as well. I'm not using that one currently, but that seems like a pretty good model. So in doing my research for this video and using various apps over the years, I'm of the very firm belief that the only way an app can work specifically for taxis is being directly linked to our meter. Because our meter is the business model of being a taxi driver. The second you go above it, you then exploit the customer. You're then not providing the same standardized, reliable taxi service. And as we are publicly hireable, in the same way that you can go jump on a bus very easily without having to go through a middleman or an operator, you want that reliability and standardization of service. And you can't subsidize the meter either, because someone invariably loses out, whether that's the driver or that's the investor who's put a lot of money into the app. If our prices vary in the same way as a private hire, or don't even link to this standardized meter, then there is no difference other than the vehicle. The difference in the vehicle will only last as long as the service, which I believe is that meter. We are ultimately publicly hired. That is the right that we have by doing the knowledge, being taxi drivers, that we can be hailed directly on the street. And any app that comes into the market has got to be built with that in mind. If you've enjoyed this, I recommend checking out this video here, where I share the reason why London taxis are specifically the colour black, and lots of other hidden history and trivia about London cabs. It's a juicy one, so I'll leave that there.